Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction where something interesting happened during the previous few days. The video was published today, and based on this video most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor. We have colored the territory as well. This is the southern part of the village by the name of Plavny. And what did happen? So let's take a look at the video, and in this video we can see the sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armored forces of Ukraine that were moving in the southern direction, and they were moving towards this building, and according most likely to the Ukrainian information, this building was captured by the Russian soldiers. First the Ukrainians were trying to storm the building, but when they discovered that there are real Russian soldiers, and in this moment of the video we can see the presence of the Russian trooper exactly on the second floor, the Ukrainians decided to fall back and they took position around the building. And after that, most likely the Ukrainians called their FPV drone operators and asked them to attack this building with the purpose to destroy the positions of the armed forces of Russian Federation. And now we see several FPV drone attacks, and after the mission was completed, the Ukrainians decided to move back in the northern direction towards the mainland. But by the time when Ukrainians began retreating, the Russians also called their ally squads in the same area to attack the Ukrainians while retreating. And the final part of the video shows us the significant number of FPV drone attacks and artillery strikes on Ukrainians that were moving in the northern direction towards the mainland, towards the central part of the village of Plavny. If we return back on map, the Ukrainians were, let's start from the beginning, because this is very important. This is very important direction. The Ukrainians, and the video started at this point. The Ukrainian soldiers were moving along this building, trying to enter and encircle this small house. That's where we can see later the Russian soldier on the second floor. The Ukrainians tried to assault the building, but something went wrong, and they decided to encircle the building on the perimeter. And after that, the Ukrainian FPV drones started attacking the Russian positions and destroyed the building completely. After that, the Ukrainians began retreating. First checkpoint where Ukrainians took a small pause is located in this point. The Russians began FPV droning them. Then the Russians began bombing the Ukrainian positions in this building. After that, the Ukrainians reached the central part of Plavny, and the Russians with the multiple launch rocket systems were bombing these positions. After that, it was very difficult to geolocate where exactly the Ukrainians were moving further. So this is the situation. Once again, based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor, saying that the Russians managed to break through, the Russians managed to capture the entire Zaporizhzhia direction, many other things. But this is very important piece of news, this is very important video, and I'll remind you that since the beginning of August we've been talking a lot about this territory, and we had the significant number of geolocations of FPV drone attacks, not just in the village of Plavny, but there was lots of strikes in the village of Kamyansk. There were lots of strikes, artillery strikes in Petykhatki, in Lapkovo, in Stepovoye, and in Stepovoye as well. So a lot of artillery, FPV drone attacks. And if you remember, we were talking that most likely the Russians are going to attack in the direction of Zaporizhzhia exactly through this area, and we made this conclusion based on the significant number of videos and geolocations that we've been receiving since the beginning of July or the beginning of August. Now let's move to the most important part. So how the Russians managed to enter the territory, why the Ukrainians didn't show any resistance, and why the Ukrainians, while moving in the southern direction, didn't know for sure where the Russian positions and where the Ukrainian positions. To receive the answer to this question, it's very good to open this icon, and this icon shows the satellite picture of the territory. As you can see, the satellite picture of map completely differs from the satellite picture of the fresh, let's say, pictures that were made recently. And as you can see, this arrow shows the points of the point where the clashes were taking place. This is exactly the area. And as you can see, according to this map, there is a river. there is a it's water reservoir, and but I'll remind you that in 2023 when the Kakhovka dam was destroyed, this is the Kakhovka dam, this Kakhovka dam was destroyed, this river was completely dried, and this is the current status of this territory. So as you can see, there is no water at all, and this is the biggest problem for the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians are trying to prepare some defense belts to the west of Pokrovsk. They try to improve their positions in Sumy, but we haven't received any updates, neither from the Ukraine nor from the Russian side, that anybody, either the Russians, both the Russians or the Ukrainians, either the Russians or the Ukrainians, are trying to improve their defense positions here. So basically the Russians, without any resistance, move through the former river area and enter the southern Plavny without any resistance. So imagine yourself that this happened today in October or the late September of 2024. I can't even imagine what the situation is going to look like when the temperature will fall down below zero, and when the Russians will be able to start using vehicles, maybe not tanks but light vehicles, to cross these territories in the direction of Malakaterinovka and Primorska. Anyway, I believe that when the below zero temperature will come, when the first snow will come, when the first minus temperature comes down, the Russians will begin the full-scale offensive operation, and the Ukrainians most likely will not be able to do anything. Just take a look at this satellite picture once again. The Russians have no problems when the temperature below zero to attack the Ukrainians in Zaporizhzhia, not like the fields, but Zaporizhzhia itself, by moving from Stelki in the northern direction, and the Russians will be able to land their infantry in the southern part of Zaporizhzhia without any resistance and without any problems from the Ukrainian side. So the offensive operation in Zaporizhzhia has begun. Currently it's just the work of sabotage and reconnaissance group, but the Russians are preparing themselves. And I'll remind you that during the previous few days we received a significant number of updates about the big concentration of Russian forces. A lot of military experts made additional conclusions that the Russians are going to attack Orekhov, but I believe that the Russians are going to Zaporizhzhia, because currently the situation is perfect to attack exactly in this area. Now let's move further and let's continue with the South Donetsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got report from the pro-Ukrainian map service Deep State. They reported that the Russians began full-scale offensive operation in the direction of Zolota and Nyva village, and this morning pro-Russian sources reported that the village was captured. So let's wait for additional updates. If this information is correct, then the situation for the Ukrainians is getting worse and worse. Now let's move to the Kurakhove. The Russians continue the encirclement of the Ukrainians that are currently located in the town of Gornyak and town of Kurakhove. Let's discuss some changes on the ground. According to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions to the west of the farms in the northwestern part of Krasnogorovka. This information was provided by pro-Ukrainian sources. This is the progress on the ground, as you can see. And neutral mappers reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions between Zhelana, Drugoi and Gornyak itself. So this information was also provided by pro-Ukrainian mappers. So now, as you can see, the Russians are trying to encircle this stronghold or to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area towards the town of Gornyak itself. Now let's talk about the encirclement. During the previous 24 hours, we got additional videos of how the Russians were destroying FPV droning and just pummeling everything that were moving along the main supply roads between the mainland and this Cauldron. This is already a Cauldron, this is already operational encirclement or whatever, but the Ukrainians will suffer significant losses if they decide to begin evacuation today or tomorrow. They lost their time. Now the hours are playing in Russian favor. Every single minute brings the situation closer and closer to the complete disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's discuss in details the situation between Novoselidovka and Tsukurine. Today we got reports, and this morning we start receiving updates that the village of Tsukurine was captured completely. And furthermore, the information about complete control over the village was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. As for pro-Ukrainian mappers, they just saw the control over the central and the eastern part, but some other pro-Ukrainian sources already reported about complete control, and that most likely today, the day after, the Russians first will show us the video with the flags, and then the Minister of Defense will confirm the same information. Now let's talk about Novoselidovka. If you remember, previous days we were talking that the Russians, the first Russian groups entered the eastern part of Novoselidovka, and they managed to dig in deeper between the village of Izmailovka and Novoselidovka itself. These positions were captured by the Russians a few days ago, and today we continue receiving updates from the same pro-Russian resource, and according to this source, the Russians managed to move even further, and currently there are very heavy clashes already for this stronghold. This is the stronghold that already located and lays on the main supply road, and if the Russians are able to take this stronghold under complete control, and just once again I'll remind you that this is exactly what the Russians are doing right now, today on the 7th of October, then the situation will be complete disaster, and the Cauldron will be created. The Cauldron will be completed if the Russians are able to take under control this stronghold. So this is obvious, and there are no doubts about this. So let's wait, let's see what is going to be next, because today, the 7th of October, might be the decisive day. I believe that the Russians will try to hold the situation until the 12th of October, because on the 12th of October there are going to be another NATO summit, Ramstein summit, and most likely the Russians will try to create a code, or at least to announce the complete control or complete creation of formation of this cauldron exactly by this day, by the 12th of October, to reduce Ukrainian chances to get additional military aid from the Western countries. Meanwhile, the Russian forces continue encirclement of Selidova itself. During the previous 24 hours, we got another few more videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainian positions along the tree lines to the north of the village. So this is the situation on the ground. Now let's move further. As for the Torez direction, nothing special. The same story about the Chasov Yar direction and the same story about the Siversk direction, just the regular activities. But as for the southern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians, 48 hours, the Russians carried out the significant attack on the direction of Ukrainian positions with the significant number of armored vehicles and personal carriers. The Ukrainians, according to the video that we just seen, were managed to repel that Russian attack, dealing the Russians significant damage. Anyway, the same story we used to see in the vicinity and around the flower of Pishana, but later we start receiving updates about additional changes on the ground. So most likely the Russians managed to bring additional forces to Tarskoye, and something tells me that starting of the 7th of October we're going to receive additional updates and maybe some geolocations, maybe with the videos with the flags on the territory of the village itself. If the Russians are able to take the village of Tarskoye under control, this is going to be the complete disaster for the Ukrainians on the line between Yampolovka, Terney, and Novosadova. Then just few days and these Ukrainian forces will be forced to fall back. Now let's move to Vovchansk, where the very heavy clashes are taking place, and today the Russians managed to restore control over at least 50% of the aggregate plant. So the video was published. This is the video that confirms Russian control over at least 50% of this stronghold. This is the Russian flag, but there are a few important things I would like to point to your attention. According to different mappers, almost every single mapper have already adjusted the positions in aggregate plant under complete Russian control. But the problem is that the Russians, yes, they did raise the flag, but they raised the flag in the northern part of this building, and these windows are watching to the north in the direction of Russian positions. But this video, if the Russians raised the flag in the southern part, then I would make a conclusion that yes, the southern part was also secure. The Russians see no risk to show flag in this window, but the Russians raised the flag in the northern part, which confirms that most likely the southern part is very risky to stay there and to watch in this direction due to the work of snipers or maybe FPV drones or something like this. So based on this video, we have adjusted just the 50% of this stronghold, and the Russians continue reducing to ruins the central citadel. Another ADAP 1500 arrived in the area. And as you can see, according to this video, I would like to point your attention to these buildings. So as you can see, most of the buildings are destroyed, and you can see the light that goes from one part of the building to another, which means that there are no more walls. So summarizing everything, the Russians managed to destroy, reduce to ruins the citadel, the central citadel of Vovchansk, for around 50 or for around 90%. And as soon as the Russians finish the destroying of this citadel, they will be able to maintain the line of combat contact between the north northern part of Vovchansk, and the aggregate plan. So they will be able to create the lines, the front lines along this red line, and then the Russians will be able to move further in the direction of Vovcha River and to finish the battle for the northern part of Vovchansk. As for the Sudzha and Kursk direction, there are no changes on the ground, just the regular activity. We have small changes, yes, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers. This small part, these fields and this forest were captured by the Russians, at least according to pro-Ukrainian map service Deep State. So we haven't received any geolocations that can confirm this, but maybe something like this happened. Furthermore, we got additional reports that Netherlands delivers first batch of F-16s to Kiev out of 24 promised, rest to be delivered in coming months. So that was stated by the Minister of Defense of Ukraine and Minister of Defense of the Netherlands. So nobody is going to stop the special military operation. The situation is just escalating and escalating, and everybody began the preparation for the military campaign of 2025. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.